My name's Mark with Breathe Easy Eco Solutions. We specialize in mold and asbestos abatement. Now, a common question I'm asked is there asbestos in my home? And where can I find it? So this house is slated for demolition. And what needs to happen prior to getting the approvals and permits all in place is we need to find out, is there asbestos in this house? The way we do that is I come in and I look at asbestos suspect material. Now, what is suspect material? Suspect material is material that was installed during either a new home build, or during renovations at some point between the 1920s up until 1990. Things that we want to look at is drywall. So the drywall joint compound commonly has asbestos fibers. Now this house is all drywall. I've done kind of a pre-inspection before starting, and we'll do a walkthrough and have a look at that. Now, if there was plaster in this house, the skim coat on the plaster is another area that can contain asbestos fibers. Flooring, vinyl sheet flooring, and floor tiles. Now in the attic, we want to look for what's called vermiculite insulation. Vermiculite is a material that kind of looks like gravel. It's a shiny type gravel material, and it often contains asbestos fibers. Now, other areas we want to look at is, does this house have a boiler or does it have a furnace? If it has a boiler, we want to look at boiler insulation or parging material on the outside of the boiler. We want to look at insulation on the boiler pipes themselves. And of course, there's also areas inside the boiler or older furnace that can contain asbestos. Things like the gasket on a door that might be on the boiler. It can also be on ducting. So it's a fiber ducting tape that is quite often put normally on joints, but it can be found across the entire main or ducting in the basement. Now it can also be found on a vent where the ducting then comes through and makes contact with the building materials, the wood materials, or the plaster or the drywall. So what we're going to do is we're going to head downstairs. We're going to start down there and just do a walkthrough, and I'll point out all of the areas that I look for and suspect materials. And you can see here is the furnace. This is a high efficiency furnace, and you can tell by the two pipes that come up here. Now, areas that we want to look at is the ducting itself. So we can see here that there is aluminum duct tape on the plenum. And if we kind of walk along, we want to take a look at areas like joins, like this here and this here. So I'm currently not seeing any asbestos or suspect asbestos tape on the ducting. We've got some more aluminum tape up here. So now that we've determined that there's no asbestos or suspect asbestos material on the ducting of the furnace, we can move on to the next step. So that would be wall covering and insulation. So down here we can see behind the furnace we have plywood, and we have some fiberglass insulation that's coming out the bottom. Over here we have some wood paneling. And again, you can see the fiberglass insulation there. So in walking around the entire basement, we can see that it's all wood products. We don't see any suspect type compounds in this area. So wood product and paneling and fiberglass insulation is fine and is not suspect material. So before we head upstairs, there is one area that I'd like to check that commonly has asbestos containing material, and that is actually above the furnace. It resembles a piece of drywall essentially made out of concrete, and it's called transite. And now I'm not seeing any on this side here, and I'm not seeing any on this side here. Generally it would be on the other side, and it may be mounted to the bottom of these floor joists between that and the furnace. And what that was used for was a heat shield. So now that we've determined that there's no concerns down in the basement, we want to look on the main floor. So we'll start off by looking at the flooring itself. Carpeting is generally not a concern, but the mastic or the glue that is keeping it down, if it is glued down, can be a concern. So we can see here in the closet, it doesn't appear to be glued down. There's tack strips in the corner here, and we have hardwood flooring underneath that. Now we're up on the second floor, and we have carpeting, and then we have 9-inch floor tiles. So these are the older floor tiles that are definitely suspect material, and these tiles are quite common when people think of asbestos-containing material. They think of these type of tiles. Now when looking further around, we can see that we have wood flooring in the closet. So that is not suspect. And then we have some carpeting in here. So we want to make sure that we take a look underneath the carpeting and this carpeting as well to make sure that these tiles or a different type of tiles aren't underneath this carpeting. So when looking at these floor tiles, we can see that they are brown in color with a design. Now, we want to look for similar tiles, and if there are any that are different or non-homogeneous, we want to make sure we take samples of those. So those can be tiles that maybe are a different size or a different color. Something that doesn't look the same, samples should be taken of each one. There are common areas where you'll find a checkerboard type pattern or some kind of pattern made up of multiple different colors of tiles. You should test every different color to confirm that none of them contain asbestos. So we know that drywall is installed in sheets and there are screws put in at the stud points. So when taking a sample, a good area is along a corner. In here where there's going to be tape that extends out where they mudded it. So by taking a sample of this area is going to be a good assessment of whether it contains asbestos or not. Exterior corners are probably the best location, or inside closets, just because those areas usually aren't renovated. So here's an area inside of a closet that I may take a sample on. And what we want to do is we want to take 3 samples in here. So I would probably take a sample in there. I would take a sample in the back room and probably on the second floor. Now that's the same with drywall or plaster. We want to get 3 different samples and make sure that they're all negative. If one of them is positive, then it's likely that there is asbestos throughout. We can't determine exactly where the new stuff is and where the old stuff is, so we have to remove it all as asbestos-containing material. Now if the basement had been drywalled and finished, we would want to take 3 samples upstairs and 3 samples downstairs. Just because when houses are built, they're usually built and sold with an unfinished basement. And then years later, months later, that basement starts to get finished. But it's done at a different time. So looking back at homogeneous wall materials or building materials, it would not be homogeneous with the upstairs because it was done at a different time. Other areas that we want to look at is up. So the ceiling. So what is on the ceiling? Quite often there is stipple on ceiling. On walls you can find wall texturing. So those are compounds. And again, if they were installed between the 1920s and 1990, that is suspect material. Other areas on the ceiling are ceiling tiles. So if you have older ceiling tiles, you definitely want to get them tested before disturbing them. Now moving on to other areas, we want to look at bathroom or kitchen tile grout. Now we didn't see any tile in this house. We've seen some wallboard that appears to look like tile. But that grout itself is a compound and can contain asbestos. There is also no fireplace in here. Quite often brick masonry work, the mortar can contain asbestos fibers. And then inside of the fireplace itself, you may see some kind of heat shielding, similar to what I discussed earlier that is above the furnace plenum or the ducting that acts as a heat shield. You can find a transite type panel inside the wall behind the fireplace itself or up in that cavity. So now that we've looked at the inside of the house, what suspect materials can be found on the exterior of the house? Starting with the roof, the asphalt shingles themselves can contain asbestos. So if you look at those shingles and you can determine that they are older, maybe there's 2 layers of asphalt shingles, the bottom layer could potentially contain asbestos fibers. So another area on the roof is underneath shingles themselves. Quite often under cedar shakes, you'll find a fiber or fabric underlayment. That's something that is another area that can contain asbestos and should be tested. On the exterior of the house, underneath the siding, you'll find that similar type of underlayment in that area as well. So if you can determine that the exterior siding or material on the outside of the house was installed prior to 1990, you want to look at that. Stucco siding on the exterior of a house is another common area that you can find asbestos, along with the parging that runs along the exterior foundation. Transite panels that we discussed earlier is quite often found on siding. It's a concrete type material that is on the exterior of the house, and it's usually overlapped. Now these areas here, if you're planning on disturbing any of this material, it's always a good idea to have it tested to confirm that it does or does not contain asbestos. Of course, if it does contain asbestos, you want to definitely contact a company, someone who's reputable, to remove that product safely for you. That's it for this video. I hope you found it useful. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions about what I've discussed here in this video, you can leave it down below in the comments section. So until next time, breathe healthy, breathe easy.